Well, I'm Pat Reed, and I'm here with Beverly Russell, part of a veteran storytelling project that's associated with HomeFront Strong. It's a local initiative to record stories of people who have served at various times, and we hope to build a collection of stories about men and women and their experience in the military. So, thank you very much for agreeing to participate. Let's just start at the beginning in terms of I understand that you joined the military by choice. And what were you thinking at that time in terms of what did you hope that the military would do for you, and how did your family react?
Well, I always wanted to travel, and I tried getting work here in this area, but it was really lousy pay, and I never saw myself going anywhere by staying here. So I thought, well, if I just leave, my family sort of hate me, you know. And so I thought, what can I do? And I thought, well, if I join the service, I have to go where they send me, so I get to travel. So that's what I did. I went and on my lunch hours, I worked in Springfield at Springfield Fire and Marine Insurance Company. And so I went in my lunch hour and I had my physical. And then I went on my lunch hour again and did the written exam. And then I was set to go. Then all I had to do was get my dad's permission. And that was kind of I wasn't sure if he would, but he did. He said, okay.
And how old were you when you enlisted?
19.
So you'd been out of high school for a little bit and working.
Yeah, yeah, just a little bit, yeah. I enlisted here in Parmer. I took the train into Springfield, and then from Springfield to New York, and then we took the civilian flight to San Antonio.
Now, I'm just trying, this was in 1956?
Yes.
Okay, so just for the audience, can you talk a little bit in terms of what options were open for women in the military in terms of service?
Well, actually, the options were pretty well open because I chose communications. They didn't choose it for me. I chose it because I thought that would be an interesting field, and it was teletype and typing and uh, different related areas. Because of course at that time we didn't have all this other stuff. So I, but I thought it would be a chance, for if I got out, there would be something that I could do also. I, but the options were up there. Whatever I wanted to do, I could have chosen. Whether I had gotten it or not would be another thing, but I could choose anything I wanted to. I think we put 3 choices down, if I remember right. And so, you know, that's what I did.
And you joined the Air Force. So, was there anything about that particular branch of the service that was of particular interest to you, or?
Not anything specifically, no. I just decided I liked the Air Force, I would go in there.
Now, I asked you specifically about how your family reacted to your choice in the military. What did your friends think about you joining the military?
Everybody thought I was a little weird because it was not a well chosen path for a woman. I'll put it that way. Uh, but I didn't really care what anybody thought. I wanted to do it, and I did it. It was none of their business. It was my life. My family was, I would say, very lackadaisical about it, really. I think they were kind of used to me being a little off the wall.
What do you remember the most about your basic training experience? You went to Texas.
Yeah, I was not a happy camper. 5 minutes after I got there, I was ready to go AWOL. They don't welcome you with open arms. They're pretty tough, but they have to be to get you to the point where you'll make a good airman or soldier or whatever. You know, they have to get you to that mindset that if you are told to do something, you don't question it, you do it. And there's a reason for that, you know, because if you're out in combat and somebody says, you know, hit the deck, you better do it because there's a reason. So that's why they're tough on you. And I think it was a good thing because it teaches you to interact with the people that you're with, to start to rely on them as they should be able to rely on you. It's a, you know, it's a two-way street.
So, when you were in basic training, were you completely segregated in terms of people of color and?
The service was not segregated. So I had a roommate who was a black lady, a gal, and we were fine, you know, we had no problem. And a lot of times I had a car. If I was going downtown and she was going downtown, I'd give her a ride. Well, the air policeman at the main gate turned me in because that was a very risky thing to do. Because the only way that she was able to ride in my car was sitting in the back seat as a servant capacity. So that was how, you know, that was how we did it. So I had to stop taking her down, and my base commander called me in, and you know, he said, "I realize you're not from here, and this is not the way you are used to things, but he said you cannot do it. It is too dangerous." So I had to stop giving her a ride. But then we had some time off, and she said, "Well, I have an aunt in Savannah, Georgia." And I said, "Okay, let's go see her." You know, so we got the chow hall to give us food, so we didn't have to stop because now we're in a situation that could get bad, you know. And we drove at night because then people would just see two people in the car. And we got down there, and they were really, really nice. And we stayed over, you know, a couple of days with them, and then went back. And it was a nice trip.
So, what would a typical day be during basic?
Oh, getting up early, like it. I think we got up around 6, and then we fell out for reveille. We had breakfast, and then we went to our respective classes. In basic training, our classes consisted of, you know, military conduct, uh, stuff like that. You know, stuff to do with the service. We were learning how to act, really.
So, it was later on that you got more involved in the occupational
Right,
training.
that's after basic training. Yeah, yeah. Basic training was strictly to teach you to be a soldier.
Do you have an estimate of how many women were in this group that went through basic training at that time?
Our flight was I not that big, and we had a sister flight, which because they didn't have enough girls coming in to make another full flight, so they attached these girls to us, and they were our sister flight. So they were not a big group. I would say maybe 50 people, maybe, you know, in the full flight.
So, there must have been many opportunities to get to know the other women in the flight and why they joined the service.
Yeah, and why they were getting thrown out.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I don't think about the part where people don't make it through basic training, but that's a thing, yeah.
Yeah, they don't make it. Some of them is just the inability to follow orders or the fact that they don't want to. You know what I mean? They're not used to having people, "You're going to do this." And now you've got somebody saying, "You're going to do this." And they can't handle that. We had a lot of girls that washed out just because they couldn't handle that discipline. And that's a big important part of it.
At that particular time, was there much emphasis on kind of the physical conditioning part of basic training?
Not so much. We marched every day. We cleaned, we scrubbed floors. We, cleaned the barracks every day. I mean, we were physically very busy all the time, but not like lifting weights or anything like that. But just basics, calisthenics and marching. That marching hardens you a lot because I'm not talking about a little stroll around the park. Sometimes we marched for a couple of hours under that hot Texas sun. That was great. Yeah.
Yes.
Lots of fun.
And then you were given your first duty assignment?
Right. Well, we were given whatever we had chosen. If we got that, then we were given our assignment to go to, like, Francis E. Warren for administrative stuff or communications, So then you went to your training facility. Yeah, so we all, we learned to work as a group. That's, I think, the biggest thing that they taught us is you work as a group.
So, at the end of your basic training, since you were going into the communications arena, your next duty assignment was really focused on that training.
Oh, yes, yes.
And where was that?
In Francis E. Warren Air Force Base, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and my class started at 6 in the morning. So I got rousted out at 4:30 with the rest of the girls, But it was 4:30 in the morning, and we would fall out for Beverly, and it would be snowing Wyoming in February. It's lovely. And, but we survived. But we would I had 6 hours a day of instruction. As we had, I don't know if you know anything about teletype. The tape is about this wide, and it has like feed hole in the center, and then it punches holes. Now, wherever the holes are, however many there are, and the placement, that's what that letter means. So like A, that's the only one I remember now, is there were 2 dots and then spaces. And that was A, and then B might be like 1 dot and 1, 2 dots or something like that. But yeah, every dot was placed in where it would be to make a letter.
Okay.
So we had to learn to read that. That was part of our instruction, was we had to read those dots. And that was one of your final tests, was you had to be able to read all the dots, no mistakes.
Were you actually creating teletype too? So you had to use a keyboard, or how?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's like a typewriter,
Okay.
but instead of keys, it has like little prongs coming up to punch the holes. And so you can type so much faster because there's no keys to jam. You could just fly. I mean, I was doing like 120 words a minute on the tape because there were no keys. So there was nothing to stop you from going that fast.
And so this was critical in terms of communications at all levels. So what would, as you got more involved in that particular occupation, how would that be used? How would you be communicating with other people or sharing the information you were seeing on the teletype?
Well, you could forward it on to them. We would get it into our comm center, and we would have to read the tape then to know where to send it, because we would either, like it was a relay station almost, and you had to know where to send it to the next level. So you might get the tape in today, and you would send it out, and then you wouldn't ever hear anything else about it. and I had a top secret clearance, so I got to see a lot more than a lot of them did.
You know, I was hoping to get into your top secret clearance a little bit as we talk. So please, you tell me what's comfortable. I know that there are certain rules and regulations, but as you moved into other duties assignments and communications, you saw a lot of information come in that was classified.
Yeah, there's certain areas that's just not a problem for me to talk about. When I was at Maxwell Field, that was Air University headquarters. So uh, all the pilots had to come once a year to keep their status current, to make sure they was still, their eyes were still good, they were still flying, everything. So I volunteered for a straight midnight shift because the shifts were horrible, because you go 2 days on, 2 days swing shift, 2 days midnight shift, 2 days off. Well, you were never regulated, and it was driving me nuts. So I said, "Can I just volunteer for night shift?" And that was great with everybody because they didn't want to do that, and I didn't mind. But I was the only person on there with the top secret clearance, so I got to see everything that came in. And the most interesting things that I got, which I can talk about now, is Operation Blue Book. Okay, that is the one about all the aliens, all the encounters that they have had with flying machines that they cannot identify. Okay, so I would get information from the pilots coming in that were chasing people, you know, and then I would have to send these on to, the next higher echelon.
Now, I'm presuming here, but this happened more than a couple of times.
Oh, heavens, yes. It happened a lot of times, because I used to laugh when people said, "Oh, yeah, there's no such thing," and I'd say, "Yeah, right." Because you can't discount the airmen that have been flying for years in very sophisticated aircraft, and they chase something which poof disappears. I mean, you can't discount that when it happens over and over and over. So, yeah. So that was kind of interesting. And the other part of that top secret stuff that I liked, which still gives me a chuckle, we would get messages in. It was a secured area, okay? And I had an air policeman on guard duty all the time. But I would get a communication in, and it would be addressed to another squadron or a particular person or something. Okay, so then I would have to contact these people, and it might be 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would get a major out of bed. That always made me happy. And he would come over and be so grumpy, and I couldn't help it. I had the message, it came in, I had to get it to him. And so then he always wanted to come in and use the phone. And I'd say, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't allow you in. This is a secured area." "Well, I've got to use the phone." And I said, "Well, you can't use the one in here. I'm sorry." I said, "I have an air policeman right there. He will tell you the same thing." So, but that always kind of made me happy to be able to say no to a major.
I'm sure that doesn't happen too often, yeah. After you completed your training, you went to Maxwell in Alabama?
Yeah, Montgomery, Alabama.
And how long were you there?
Like 2.5 years, yeah.
So what did you do for your free time activities?
We went to clubs a lot down in Montgomery because we were so close there. And we could go away from the base within a 150-mile radius without any kind of a pass or anything. So we had a gal that lived like 151 miles from, and we would go to her family. They had a big farm, and they just loved it when we all piled in there. I don't know why, but 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 they were really nice to us. So we got to go out, away from the base for a while.
You were kind enough to share some things before we started the interview, and I do, because this is specific to your time at Maxwell. I'm holding in my hand a Civil Air Patrol flight certificate, which is pretty impressive. You want to talk a little bit about what your experience was in the flight in a T-33?
Well, I was like 2 weeks away from discharge, and the Civil Air Patrol, they brought them in for training. And so since I was so close to discharge, they just transferred me from communications over to them for my last 2 weeks. So that was great for me. I didn't care, But part of their little fun thing in Maxwell Field was they got to take a T-33 trainer. And they're just a little two-seater. The pilot's in the front, passenger in the back. And so seeing that they attached me to it, that I got to do that too. But the thing was that the T-33 trainer, the major that I had that was flying with me, he said to me, "Do you want to take over?" I said, "Sure." Why not? So he went, "It's all yours." And I looked, and it's a joystick. It was so sensitive that if you breathed on it, you took yourself up 1,000 feet, So I kept watching the little plane in the horizon. I could not keep it there. I kept going up, So 18,000 feet is what you're supposed to stop at if you haven't been in the training for anything higher. And I took us up to 21,000 feet, and he said, "I'll take it back now." Okay. But it was fascinating because there is such a small jet that you get much more feeling of speed than you do in like a big ocean liner or something, But we taxied down the runway when we were taking off, and we had a mall that was like 30 minutes by car to get to this mall, right? So we get to the end of the runway, and he pulls up and he says, "And there's the what mall?" And I went, "What?" It was like 2 breaths and we were there,
Wow.
Yeah, but it was really neat to do that.
Yeah.
So I can say I flew a T-33 for 3 minutes.
And it was a jet, not just a plane, a jet. Yeah. Wow. That sounds like it was a great experience.
Yeah, that was fun, yeah.
So you made the decision after your first enlistment to re-enlist, and what were you thinking about at that point?
Well, I wanted to re-enlist for overseas, because I figured that would be a good opportunity to see a little more of the world. And so that's why I re-enlisted. I re-enlisted with a girl that I met in Alabama. She was from Dorchester. So we went and re-enlisted together. I got England, she got Germany.
And did you spend your entire time, the 2 years in England, or did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
in England, yeah. I was assigned to the base communications. And it was not very long after that they just switched me over to switchboard operator. I liked England, and I liked the fact that I could go travel a little bit, to Paris and Germany, places. So that was fun.
And did you live on the base, or?
Yes, I did. Yeah. They had very small living quarters, and so anybody above the grade of airman first class, which I was, anybody above that grade usually got a off-base housing. They had a lot of people in that general area who would rent out a room in their house. And so that's what the gals would do. They would go get a room.
So, when you had the time and you wanted to explore Europe, how did that work? Were you able to use military transportation, or how
Uh, yeah, normally we would go commercial because your time was limited. So this way you do it on your time, you know. We had restrictions because I had a top secret clearance. I could not go within 15 kilometers of the Berlin Wall.
for people who might not be that familiar, so at that point in time, East Germany and West Germany divided by the Berlin Wall. And what would the concern have been, just for any military personnel going anywhere in that vicinity?
Yeah, any military personnel they figured would be better off not to be able to be in a position where you might get captured. You know, so that was just kind of a safety measure.
So you had this experience over two enlistments where you were able to acquire skills in the communications arena. And then at the end of your second enlistment, what were you thinking at that point in time in terms of making the transition back to civilian life?
Well, I decided that it was too easy to become too dependent on the fact that you always had what they always said, 3 hots and a cot. You know, you could always get 3 meals a day and a bed to sleep in. And so you were not as maybe motivated to do for yourself. So, and I thought that would be a trap to fall into, you know? So I elected to get out. So I did. After Maxwell, I came back here for a couple of years. And I had my friend who had just moved to California with her husband and her son. And so I'd never seen California. And I thought, well, I can go out there. I can bunk with them for a couple of weeks and find a job, you know. So that's what I did. I went out. But 28 years later, I finally left California. So I was out there for quite a while. But I went to work for that small company called Hydrodyne. And they were a good company to work for because they wanted you to stay with them. So they gave you a lot of opportunities to stay. You know, they made it worth your while.
When you went to work for that company, were there particular things in terms of skills you had acquired in the service that they was a really good fit for that company and that environment?
To a certain extent, I started on the switchboard. So, of course, that was work that I had learned in the service. And then teletype was fading out at that point, you know, going into other areas. So, no, I just kept moving through the company because I kept learning. You know, I kept learning more. I didn't even know how to read a blueprint when I went in there. And I ended up as a quality control supervisor. So, you know, you got to learn. So if you want to get ahead, you just exert yourself. Let them know you want to learn.
And what was happening in the aerospace industry at that time? What was the focus?
Well, it was mostly on the shuttle. And our company made a small or large, small, whatever size they needed seals, and they were made out of metal. They expand and they allow the explosion to occur. They shut down. And then they're at all kinds of different places within the shuttle where they've sealed, you know, whatever fluid they don't want to leak somewhere else.
So critical, these were manned flights, so safety of the astronauts was paramount.
Yeah, that's why this.
And so let me look again at the Snoopy pin.
Yeah, the ones that received this pin contributed to the safety of the space shuttles. That was part of the criteria to get these.
So you were presented with that
By an astronaut.
by an astronaut. It must
Yeah.
have been an exciting time.
But the scary thing was they don't tell you that this is happening beforehand. And so, I was in there at work, and I had seen all these people trucking through. But, Rocketdyne came through a lot of times because you know, we were supplying them with a lot of parts. And so they came and looked us over all the time. And so I didn't pay any attention. But all of a sudden, somebody said, "Hey, Bev, they want you up in the conference room." So I said, "Okay." So I went up there, and an astronaut steps out and says, "Who's Beverly Russell?" And I thought, "She is." I said, "That would be me." And so then is when I found out I was getting it. And that was with a bunch of Rocketdyne executives, the astronaut, and all these big wigs around.
How many years were you actually working in the aerospace industry?
Let's say 25 years.
If you could share a little bit about that transition experience, what the hard parts were, and you landed in a successful career, but is there something you can share about the transition?
The hard part for me was the fact that when you're in the service, you live in a barracks with other girls that are all in the same boat you are. They're away from home, they're young, you know, and there's a lot of parallels you could draw with all the other girls in that barracks. And one of them was, if you wanted to go somewhere and do something, there was always somebody there that would go with you. When I got out, that was cut off. Now I'm looking at, girls that got babies and they just recently married and they don't have time to go out with you. So you end up being pretty lonesome for about a year. I know I was when I started working, and it got friendly with the girls, that I worked with. Then it was a little easier. And then after that, I got a whole group of friends, and that was fine. But it took a while, and it was very hard for me, because that was a big thing, was camaraderie.
Yeah, that's good information to share, the transition experiences.
Yeah, it is. It was hard. I won't. I won't lie about it. It was very hard.
What would you say to younger people who are trying to think about whether or not military service would fit into their life?
I would tell them to go and do it. Because if you hang around waiting for other people, you will never, ever do anything. I realized very soon in my life that if I wanted to do anything, don't wait on anybody else. If you wait for other people, forget it. Like I say, I don't want to be sitting on my front porch at 90 years old saying, "I wish I had," instead of "I'm glad I did," you know? And that's what will happen to you if you wait for other people. Don't wait, just go do it if it's something that you want.
And I think it's interesting that at the time that you were in the military, women were a very small percentage of people who served.
The Rocketdyne inspector, one of them, said to me one day, he said, "Bev, this is the only company that has women in inspection that I go to." And they went to a lot of companies. And I said, "Well, my boss thinks that women are more precise, and that's what he wants."
Well, I so appreciate your time today, Beverly.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I hope it helps.
I'm sure it will. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.